I'm Gustavo Konte, SecurityGen. Today we'll be touching a very, let's say, delicate subject because it's regarding real denial of service in mobile operators. Let's say it's quite complicated to address these without, let's say, giving out information on how to do this kind of attack to those who doesn't who are not aware yet of it, and also not let's say to blame the operators on these happenings, right? So let's address what we'll be talking today. So first of all, talking a little bit about the signaling, telecom signaling so far. So from the early analog signaling to today's 5Gs, at some attack scenarios and how to prevent those, and our vision on how to be proactive on the vulnerability management, how to act before those issues really affect mobile networks. So if you look, this is quite European vision, right? It may change a little bit depending on your region. You may be, let's say, faster or delayed according to this, but in general, right, we have analog as a technology, first generation between the 80s and 91. 91, you have GSM starting, so you have the second generation, and it has a set of steps, but you see there are 2 decades where just SS7 was used, right? And to be honest, it's still in use. You are going 5G and you still have SS7 signaling across all those mobile networks. Then when we started doing data, right? 2.5G, edge, whatever flavor you like to call it, you start having GTP protocol, which is still a norm. It's still using 5G natively. So that's a protocol that's not going away. But then when you move it to 4G, everyone believed that the diameter will be, let's say, the new thing. It will be the new signaling, and it will last forever because it's TCP based, because it's IP based. It could be something to, let's say, fully replace SS7. Has failed so far, and let's see how long it will survive after 5G launch. 5G is a new animal, so it's signals over HTTP2 and PFCP, which is in the end of the day is a GTP version. So if you look at this is a really vision of how old are those signaling protocols, and they came from 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and they have no, let's say, specific security requirements about the time. So telco is always about availability, is always about having the network working, interoperating well. So those protocols are built to work, not to be secure. I will exclude HTTP2 and PFCP for a moment because they are safer than diameter and SS7, and also GTP as, let's say, GTP 1.0, 2.0. But still, they are not, let's say, intended or really strict on security. So I would be describing 3 general cases today, and I have my personal disclaimer here because I'm not basing on one case, one operator. So every of the 3 cases of outage we are presenting today is based on at least 2, sometimes 3 or more reported case, public case, or otherwise known by us. So it's not any, if you think, oh, this is a total service outage is related to this operator, okay, that's one case. It's not the single one that happened, and it's not the single one that used this methodology. So we're not pointing out fingers to the operators, but we are using this as an opportunity to learn. And I used to follow a guy for a long time, like Chris Roberts. It's British, now in the US. So he's, let's say, old times hacking guys, and he has a phrase I have to use here, that blaming the victim is never the answer. So it's not that the operators did something bad or failed to do that their part or their share on that. It's basically because there was a vulnerability which was not addressed in time, and sometimes not. Let's say something that could be handled by the technology they have at the time. So this total service outage, one of the ways it happens, is just a matter of sending malformed or invalid SS7 message. So there are some elements that, let's say, were built in the trust times when everyone understood that message will be exchanged between operators. No one could generate an SS7 message, right? By the time it was all about serial links. So someone had to physically get access to the link in order to inject a message. It was so unthinkable of, right? So impossible. So when 30 years ago SS7 was created, 31 now. So those elements are not hardened. So if you change some parameters, you put some invalid parameters, everything could happen. And this, we have seen this being used before. At some cases, it's called national outage, right? Sometimes you have not enough redundancy between elements. You are a small country, you have a few hundred thousands or a few million subscribers who have a pair of elements or so. So if you impact both, you have national outage, which can really perdure for several hours, and you can get up to millions of subscribers without mobile coverage. So that has happened before. That's something that's, unfortunately, I cannot say it's fully impossible these days. It's, let's say, it's more difficult, but it's still possible. Another case we have seen more than once is about credential abuse. So you have someone that will be trying to brute force passwords from a mobile operator employee, or try to use malware or to do social engineering to get those credentials, and even paying for these credentials, right? We have some forums, we've seen people asking for credentials for mobile operators and specifically for groups. So it's naming. They're just let's say lazy or lame, and they start paying out people for VPN access. So if you have nowadays, when you have much of those operators still working remotely or at least partially remotely, this is still something to be dealt with, right? Usually the operators has a second factor authentication. Usually it's SMS based. So we have some cases about these SMS being intercepted or a SIM swap being performed against a mobile operator employee. So that's something that's hard to accept, but it's still possible and happened. So with these, following these steps, they got access to a corporate network, sometimes with the same access that someone uses for his email or for some other corporate systems. They can get to a VPN, they can get to a network element, and then it's game over because you gave access as a command line access to a network element. So you're not thinking about sending malformed message or anything like that. So out of these, we have a seen up to national outage, service disruption, even if it's not a full service, but some service affected. And sometimes, as we have a triple play and a quadruple play and n-tuple play, whatever, mobile network and other services were affected. One thing that we see is that if you have thinking about signal security, it could have stopped the queue chain because it's complex, it's rightly done, right? It's rightly implemented. So it cannot, just because you brute force a password or you stole a password, it's not that you are inside the network. You have a second factor. So if you did your signal security job well and you kept it safe, which is the worst part of it, you could have stopped the attack anyway. That's why we're focusing on signaling, right? We see this as something that's, let's say, that's a missing link at a lot of security postures we've seen, a lot of security plans, right? Other point is about subscriber data breaches. Okay, this is no denial of service, at a point because you're not disrupting service initially. But as in Europe, we have GDPR, and you have its equivalents, right? And based in Brazil, we have LGPD, which is pretty much like GDPR, sometimes even more strict. In my regions, Latin America, we have Uruguay, have also a very good privacy law based on GDPR. In the US, it's still something, let's say, state-based, but it's growing. And we've seen that a lot of information is defined as personal information, right? No longer only on the security books, but now on the bills, on the real laws. So one of the things that the GDPR considers as private is the IMSI, right? It's the unique identifier of a subscriber. It's not your list number, it's something else. And it's considered personal because it can identify you across networks, it can be used to track you, etc. So when someone is looking for it, as we have seen recently, almost €1 million fine for someone driving around a van and collecting either IMSIs and MAC addresses from the air. So someone in Cyprus started collecting this kind of information. It was not the operator. In fact, there's nothing that an operator could do to avoid eavesdropping of this information, at least to an extent, right? So it's still possible to improve, etc. But if you position this equipment right and if you have the right conditions, it may happen that you collect some IMSIs. So IMSI catchers are something that's been around for a lot of time. Some companies are doing it, let's say, publicly. They have a market van saying we are collecting data. And again, now since these laws, these bills have passed, we are seeing them receiving huge amounts of punishing fines on that. So the same thing could happen to a mobile operator that fails to do whatever can be done to protect it. So it's no service disruption per se, but it's about having some financial impact indeed. So what we've seen happening is sometimes IMSI is being stolen, sometimes being personal data of some other nature, right? In the US will be the equivalent of the social security number. So this is not a denial of service in per se, although you can use IMSIs to perform a denial of service, and we have seen this a lot of times, right? But usually the attacker just collects all this information and contacts the operator and asks for money. Okay, I'm not disclosing this data as long as I've been paid for. And that's something that, let's say, this is the usual behavior of this kind of attacks. Still, if you know a lot of valid IMSIs, let's say you're in a good shape to perform a denial of service. So that being said, it's not that we have not seen this kind of attack. It's that we cannot really, let's say, assure at this time how those IMSIs were collected. So we're not describing this as a denial of service, but as a potential one. So which are the scenarios that we have seen and how to prevent those scenarios to happen, right? We are a specialized company in telco security, and we have a lot of background on the signaling security. Because as for the initial of the presentation, as you have seen, this is some legacy protocols that are being around for decades. So usually you abuse those protocols either to attack a subscriber or a network. So you could be targeting a subscriber, you could be looking for its location, you can be looking just to perform a denial of service to the subscriber. And again, when I talk about the subscriber, it looks, oh, it's a person. And if you look at the market, so we have millions of subscribers, which are in fact IoT these days, which are, let's say, used to track cargo around. So if you can deny of service a cargo tracker, you're just leaving an unprotected vehicle roaming somewhere, right? So you can do that also to, let's say, shut down a GPS or whatever, which also uses this kind of uses a mobile access to report to a central or to get information. You can intercept SMS and calls. You can redirect those calls to perform even, let's say, more sophisticated attacks. And you, in the end of the day, you can just do a billing system bypass, either to get some free calls or free messages. This is not enough, but maybe to generate tons of calls to premium numbers and get paid for those. These we have seen a lot. On the other hand, you could be just targeting the infrastructure, the operator itself. So you want to map the network, you want to deny of service at one element, and can be any. So you can be focused on deny of service of voice or on registering or on data, whatever. So we'll be addressing these scenarios. So in this case, we're just talking about subscriber attack. And why I say it's multi-protocol? Because you start on one stack, you start on diameter, you send a message, and we are omitting the message here because we're not willing to inform or to, let's say, make it popular. So if you work in that in telco with signaling, you know about the messages already, and I don't need to inform you. If you don't, again, it's not necessary for the explanation. So first of all, use diameter to get IMSI on the subscriber. You could be using SS7. Maybe diameter is easy at some time. And once you have this IMSI information, you can start tracking the subscriber. You can send other message through SS7 or even through diameter. In this case, is diameter and then SS7. Could be the other way around. Could be using just one stack. But again, when you use multiple stacks, it's easier to hide yourself because you're sending part of the attack to some elements and the second part to other ones. So someone needs to correlate everything to be aware of what's happening. So this is a case when you can just be intercepting some short message by influencing the network and getting this SMS sent back to the attacker. In another vision, you can just do a deny of service attack, right? You can try to exhaust some pools. So every resource is finite, right? Even processing or range of numbers, whatever. So if you pick up roaming numbers, you assign some hundreds or thousands of roaming numbers in a pool to each element, and that's enough because roaming numbers are reused over time. But if you send enough messages requesting for those numbers, which are not really subscribers in roaming, which are not related to service, but are generated by an attacker at some point, you could, in the end of the day, exhaust the resource because if the STP makes it forward and the HLR sends it forward, in the end of the day, you have a busy element that should be handling the calls in your network. And it's not that it won't be able to send calls. It's that in fact it could impact the service to every subscribers which are abroad because they at some point they cannot even register their phones anymore. So that's the problem about exhausting capacity because you just cut the registration process and you make the network too busy to answer for a legit request, right? So how to prevent those? One way of doing so is inserting a signaling firewall, an SS7 firewall. It won't send the message through, so it's a silent drop. The message will never pass into your network and will never reach the real elements or the target elements. One thing I haven't told everyone, since we have not everyone joining at the same time, thanks for everyone that has joined. You can send questions or comments anytime in the chat. I will be addressing those even at the right timing or at the end. So please be my guest to send any inputs or any questions, and I will try to address those to my best. That's a commitment I ever made. Sometimes I may fail to that. Usually, usually everyone gets satisfied, and especially me, because I have good questions for those audience. So the good way is that when you have it and you integrate a signaling firewall, you just can prevent those messages to get inside at the border. So you don't even get your STP busy on deliver those, and you get no other elements affected. Another way is just to send a lot of registration. It's a registration storm. So you say, oh, I have a lot of subscribers to being registered into your network. So just make mass sending of registration messages. You say, okay, you have a lot of your subscribers registering my international network. And again, when you do that in volume, you're just congesting the network. So just say, oh, okay, those subscribers that are moving around, they have a lot of information to send back to the VLR until you get the network busy and no one can move anymore. Maybe if you are registered, okay. If you have to do a location update for any reason, right? You're moving around the city or just lost coverage for a second, whatever. It's time to do your location update. Several hours have passed and the network pages you and say, okay, where are you now? Anytime you get this kind of event, you're not able to perform it fully. So you could end up getting a full denial of service over time if it keeps sending those messages. And this is something that it's, let's say, really cheap of doing because it's a computer. It's really an attacker with a notebook can send thousands of those messages per second. So again, one way to prevent those is to put in something at the border. It's to blocking that. Illegitimate network management. That's also not cool, right? You just inform the network, and this is a trust-based protocol again. You just say that you are the network element and you are too busy, or you see that you have seen some congestion in some route, in some link. And the elements, since it's trust-based, they will stop communicating to the element you informed the network because it's the most efficient way, right? So to avoid, we have a good question for Richard. On which parameters the fire could act? Okay. So there are lots of categories. So GSMA, which you probably know about, it's associations of operators, and it has its fraud and security group. So it's FAS. So this group, with the help of many experts, some of those I work with today in SecurityGen, they have built recommendations for SS7 diameter GTP security. And if you look at those, there are some categories. So if you consider category 1, let's say, there's some message that should never be accepted from an external network. So answering to Richard, I can just check for the message type and I can say, okay, this is a message that should never enter from an external roaming network. So I can block on message type, and that's it. I'm not accepting these because those are internal messages that should be used by my network elements to talk between themselves. So this is an example for this kind of illegitimate network management. So we should not receive a message from an external mobile operator telling me that my elements are out of service or are congested, right? I'll try to address other examples on the coming slides. Thanks, Richard. So again, the result is that since this element is unavailable and no one is talking about, no other elements are talking about with the MSC anymore, everyone who is registered at this VLR, which is using this element, just lose service. Can try to register again. Maybe you get sent to a different element, but again, if you're doing this kind of attack, you can just attack the next element and so on. So how to prevent those? Okay, this is kind of simple. As I mentioned, this is about blocking full amount of message. So it's a on message type, and not even saying that you need a firewall on that. Your STP can have a simple rule that says those kind of messages are not entering the network, so they're not never getting into the other elements, and it's solved. If the FTP is not able to filter a message, you can use a firewall, but usually that's not the case. Because this is just a easy rule, STPs are able to perform those. Another way of doing a network DOS attack, and now we're talking about diameter, right? We're talking about sending message through your DEA, to a diameter border. You can send, let's say, one message type, and that has to be accepted. So now we're talking about this, not category 1 anymore. So we're talking about a message that should be accepted from a roaming interface, but you just misuse those messages. Or you send a malformed message. You send a message which has invalid data in it, right? And by abusing that, we have seen that before, we can start to inform the element, in this case the MME, that it needs to register all those elements again. So it's not a problem when you move around the city and you register your mobile across, because you're not doing this every time. So it's expected to have a number of register per minute, per hour, per second. But when you inform the entity that's responsible for this registration that it needs to register a lot of elements at the same time, you just congest the network and you keep disconnecting and reconnecting the device. So if you think about a connected car, if you think about IoT, industrial IoT, this is not expected to being reconnected every second or every 8 seconds, right? If you're a mobile subscriber, unless you're using it at the time, you hardly notice. But that for some applications, and depending for sure on let's say the size of this storm, if you do it, let's say, largely enough, you can just impact the full network. If you do it focused enough, and then again, that's the matter on allowing people to collect your IMSI somehow, because you may be focusing on specific IMSIs. Like, let's say you want to have the IMSIs on a autonomous car fleet, and you just go across the street of this, let's say, autonomous car company and start sniffing for IMSIs, or otherwise you do it remotely, but you have some ways of recognize those elements. So again, you can have a huge storm focused on the specific services on a specific IoT. This is something that still keeps me up at night. Again, the impacts are network unavailability, even complex, full, or force set of subscribers. And again, in this case, right, you should just send an error back and say, okay, you should never, this message not being accepted, this is not a valid message. And in that case, you won't be sending the message into the network and denial of service fails. But for that, you usually need a diameter firewall, because this is, and thanks again for the question, Richard, this is not message-based. So there are some specific parameters inside that you should be using to validate, right? This is a valid message, but should be sent, for instance, for someone, some subscriber from abroad. So if you have in your network a subscriber for an international country, say you have in your network some subscriber from Brazil, and you're not in Brazil, you should accept those messages if they are target at this subscriber, not if they are target at your local subscribers. So this is a more complex. You have to check the message, you have to check the origin, So who is sending this, which network is sending this, and you have to check also which is the target subscriber, if it belongs to that network or not. Since it's a complex case, you have to do at least a three parameters check. You need a firewall to do that. So what you have seen is that, okay, I talked about reactive, I talked about blocking the known case, etc. So we're talking a lot about firewalls. But what we have seen that since it's evolving that fast, we have seen that you must be proactive, right? Not react to attacks, because no one's wants to react after we have denial of service. So those are some of the publications have quoted, right? We have FS21 for signaling, have specifically for SS7 SIGTRAN. So we have a lot of norms that were made available from GSMA that can help you protect it. And again, those are all good recommendations that should be implemented on your border elements and firewalls. But we don't see they are enough at this point, right? So just making a recall of the case we have been discussing. Some cases are SS7 based, they can just be blocked by a signaling firewall. The other diameter with the same nature, and some are easily done and blocked by the STP. And you just have to, in this case, you have to, most of it, you just have to follow the instructions on those publications for diameter, for SS7, apply to the network, and you are, let's say, good to go. So once you have a network denial of service possibility, you think that the huge part will be the immediate loss of revenue. But when we measure that, the bigger impact is not about the hours you have no service or the affected subscribers from this period of time. Let's say you get 1 hour of downtime. But when you see the churn increasing, when you see fines and sanctions from your regulatory agency, this is much bigger money from the case we have just discussed. So usually churn is the bigger impact of all. And nowadays with 5G, we see the fines and the 5G and privacy laws for sure. We see the fines are just rising a little bit. You see, thinking about 100,000 pounds a day for in the UK before, it was not reasonable. No one was expecting or acting on this possibility. And from I think 4 years now, 3-4 years, it's a possibility that you receive this kind of fine for failing to protect subscribers. So what we recommend is not only to implement defense, so protection via signaling firewall, yes, we recommend that, but you need to monitor also to check if someone is scanning your network, is doing what we call rehearsal attacks, right? Because the attacks that doesn't start on day one, right? They start on the day minus something, because someone will check which are the methods that are possible in your mobile operator network and say, okay, this operator is accepting this and this method. What can I do to get maximum profit out of it? Or how could I just deny of service it? They'll just, first of all, they'll try to send the message to see which are available or not. And if you're not monitoring, you're protecting, okay, you're likely to catch those messages. But if a single one passes through your defense, you're not seeing it. And you cannot improve your defense of that. Other possibilities that no one is, you have monitoring, and no one is rehearsing, or they just are aware you have monitoring and they just do a short rehearsal and start the attack. So in that case, you cannot, let's say, trust the attackers to give you enough time to react. So we're talking about what we have been doing for IT as long as I know, which is proactively testing. So inspecting it actively, right? Test your network, check, try, apply those methods before the attacker. And also do this in a constant way. Why so? It's not that you have blocked it. It's a live network. So I think it's even worse than some IT networks because, let's say, it's a chain of trust. So you have a roaming provider, which at some point in time has these filters implemented. Then you have your border elements, which must be, let's say, updated and reconfigured every once in a while. And if you have a signaling file, it's the same. So we have a lot of elements, we have a lot of routing, and sometimes that changes because, let's say, not the technical guys, but the wholesale guys or the company decides it has to cut costs on roaming. It's not that you get a lower service on roaming. I'm not talking about that. I love all the roaming providers. The point is, when you change the configuration, when you include a new roaming provider, you are changing this chain. So you should test afterwards, because some of your protection maybe was turned off, or maybe this roaming provider sends you message in a different way, and that's it. So it's not about this solution or that solution. It's a live network. So, and if you look at roaming changes, right? Let's say usually you see about hundreds of updates on roaming configuration per month. Not all of those are applicable, so we have to check it. So there are companies living just out of, let's say, informing the change that apply to your network, because you have to check. There's an exchange of documents uh, on the across GSMA when we were informed which are your roaming peers, which are your roaming ranges, etc. So every operator, if you look at every operator in the world that has roaming, you're talking about hundreds to thousands of operators that are using this kind of service. And you have to check if you have a contract with these operations, and you have to update your borders, you have to update your network to start accepting this kind of message. So this changes every day. And even if you're not applying the hundreds of changes, you're applying hundreds of changes per month. So that's why I recommend you to test it constantly, not only after you do a big change like changing your border element or upgrading your border element or changing your IPX vendors, because minor changes are happening every day. So, and this is the part where I talk about products of my company. We have some solutions, right, for that. So Richard asked if I could recommend some signaling files. Yes, I have to recommend mine in that matter, but it's possible to have a demo. Yes, it's possible to demo. So if Richard, if you want to contact me or contact the company afterwards, we can do demos on the 3 approaches we believe in, which are IDS, so it's detecting, it's monitoring your signaling and sending reports. And this could be a report, an email, whatever, or this could be just an integration with your CM, right? Which is much more efficient because it can trigger an action for the exact the team that is responsible to close everything, to solve the issue. So we have this kind of integration already at some customers, and it's magical, right? You have an attack, and minutes from that, you have the responsible team reacting to this attack, even if it has failed, right? Security posture is about that. What you want to trigger the network team, and at which priority. So failed attacks can trigger reactions as well. You can also implement firewalls of SS7 for diameter and even for HTTP2. The point is, nowadays, for 5G roaming, this is not really a huge scenario. So the companies that are implementing 5G, in the case they have roaming, they usually fall back to 4G, or they have 5G roaming between, let's say, partner companies or group companies. It's not too big, but it's still a possibility to implement. So we also provide this kind of firewall. And something that's fairly new that we have officially launched yesterday, although it's already in use at some customers, is to have ACE. Great, ACE is something that I have never seen before. It's a breach and attack simulation tool for signaling. So we discussed SS7, we discussed diameter, we discussed HTTP2. ACE can send messages through all those stacks through the roaming connection and test your network in the interval that you think is applicable, and can test for the vulnerabilities that you think that matter. So if you consider that, that's a way of keeping it safe, or to knowing the, let's say, the vulnerability window that you have. So let's say you check every day. So you know that if someone that have made any change of it, and sometimes it's external, like it's a roaming provider, sometimes it's a roaming configuration done wrong. It's not, if you do tens of configurations per day, come on, it's something will go wrong. And that happens. So it's not that you can prevent every possibility. So we should monitor, as we see. And then it could be reported to the security department, or again, could be just sent to CM. If you say, no, this is too priority for me. So if something like this, if it's possible, it's not that someone has breached the network. It's ACE. It's automated tool, right? It's our artificial cybersecurity expert. So it's a tool. But if it finds a vulnerability and moves next step and looks at what can be exploitable from this vulnerability, and you consider that this vulnerability is unacceptable for a minute, you just integrate this with your CM and say, okay, in case this happened, I want a priority one case in the network team queue. I want the security department to be triggered by a live system, not by a report that will be read after some hours or days. So this is the approach we believe in order to protect this signaling network. We see that only one of these is not enough. So it's about inspection, protection, and detection. So usually protection is already performed or partially performed if you're using the STP, etc. But it's done, and then as long as you don't test it and you don't have a tool detecting, you trust it. So again, all these issues started because telco is trust-based. So at some point, we need to stop trusting these elements and trusting that a live network is safe, and starting checking and make sure that it is safe. So that's our approach. We have, as a matter of fact, products to do that in an automated way for the 3 steps. And as a matter of fact, our inspection tool can integrate with our protection tool. So again, if I do the test and I see it's being blocked, I can check if it's the file that's being blocking it, if the file has seen this message. Because it's like the shadow message is something that happens a lot. So sometimes you just have a message that passes through during a test. And when you look, maybe the file is not ours. When you ask the file vendor about the message, they say, okay, no, I have the rule, and the message had never went through my file. So again, the chain has to be checked. It's not to blame just a single element, right? Sometimes just a change, sometimes just a new balancing, whatever. It's someone in the packet core department just said, okay, we need to improve and to put new packet core elements, and they just provision those. And because of this, something changed, routing changed. Okay, and that's it. So that's the approach we believe on. I have 2 recommendations for you. One is never scan a QR code. So why I put a QR code? Well, I have to give you at least some lesson. If it was not on signaling, at least on the what to do. So yes, you may scan the QR code, This one is going to our LinkedIn page. So it's SecurityGen LinkedIn page. If you want to be in touch, also you have my LinkedIn listed just ahead of it. But if I was on your shoes, I would be doing that with a safe QR code scanner, not with your camera, right? Because when you use a safe QR code scanner, it usually minimum shows you the URL, so you can do your manual check, your visual check. Would I click this URL? Or if most, it could really evaluate the URL against known threats. So that's something I would like to share with you as well. I have a last question from Richard. What's done for a network that offers all the technologies from 2G to 5G? Should we install Fire for each of them, or there could be one to cover all of the technologies? I would recommend having one that covers all of the technologies, because otherwise you would need a separate tool just to correlate, right? So you should have one that does SS7 diameter. So when you have someone asking for IMSIs in SS7 and someone attacking these IMSIs in diameter, you see this a common line of attack. This is not a coincidence, right? You don't have to ask how this guy got these IMSIs in the first place, because I'm not seeing this in diameter. So our tool provides this kind of correlation. So you can check for the full chain of attacks. You can see when it started. Maybe someone's attacking an IMSI today in diameter, and you can just roll back and check all the messages in the past for this IMSI. So you can see, oh, this was the time when IMSI was possible to collect, and these, let's say, months ago, they collected this number of IMSIs. So I have to be aware that in some countries you may be even obliged to notify customers about that, right? Oh, I have a good question from Jadip. Thanks, Jadip. How to protect RAN from denial of service attacks from malicious IoT devices or misbehaving devices in 4G and 5G? Okay, let's check about it. So one thing that we offer, not as a product so far, but as a service, is about security RAN testing. So RAN attacks, usually they're focused on making your cell busy, or on sometimes degrading your ciphering, right? So you want to catch some IMSIs, and you go to a 4G site, and you see that every communication is encrypted. So we start sending fake message to the 4G site, to the eNode B, and try to make it negotiate down the ciphering. How do you do that? Not touching these precisely on the message today, as we have a few minutes more. But what we can do is that we go to the sites the operator informs, and we do this kind of malicious testing and see what can be done, okay? And see how the radio network is answering or behaving. And we discuss, because again, network security on mobile networks is not the same as data center security. It's not that put the rule, close the firewall, don't deal. If you cannot, if some systems cannot work, it's not my problem. That's the usual IT data center way, because it's safer. Sometimes a set of vulnerabilities or a set of risks is accepted to assure that service will be available. So that being said, if you want to make sure that this cannot be abused, we need to actively test your posture and tell you this is what can be exploited. We recommend you to not accept this kind of degrading, or to, let's say, implement some protections at this or this layer. Okay, so it's not that we can just, let's say, be bulletproof at some point, but you can check your options, your decisions, and you can have a safer RAN network, right? It's not that you're not falling back from 5G to 4G sometimes. It's just that you must be aware of the methods being used and how vulnerable you are. And also, you can just start monitoring the right kind of message. So we had a huge discussion with a big group of operators, which I won't name for, let's say, obvious reasons, but about that. And we came to, let's say, an understanding of how could we be monitoring events and which events could be monitored. Another set of attacks we have been used in LATAM, in Latin America, is about using image catchers, introducing messages in the network for business purpose, not to get, not for denial of service, whatever. Either way, you're getting money out of the operators, and our job is to make sure this doesn't happen as well. So I have some thanks for Orlando. Thank you, Orlando, for your participation. I want to take the last minutes to appreciate everyone's participation and the good questions. It was really good to be here today, and I hope to be speaking with you all soon.